Okay, so after you have the drum on, did the install of the drum, it's slid on the machine. You have a depth control system on this machine. So I'm gonna turn that on. Obviously I have the motor running. So there's 3 depths on this. There's an upright, and then there's, if you look at the middle one, that's where the drum barely touches the ground. You can actually hover it. I like hovering it just slightly above. But these are programmable. So what I do is, when I first put that on, I get the motor running, and I'll take it here. I already have this one preset because I already did it, but each drum is going to be individual. So what you do is, when the motor's running and I have it, the throttle turned up, I take the machine and I take it down and put it on a piece of concrete where it's going to barely touch. So I want to be careful that I don't do it in the middle of the floor. I want to have a piece of concrete. If I do a little bit of touching or a little bit of damage, it's not going to hurt anything. But once I get it where it's barely touching the ground, what I'll do is I'll hold this button in, and it programs it like a car radio. So that gives you your initial barely touching. So if I want to do any really light removal, I can do that. And then what I do is, once I'm up and running, I can set this depth. So what I would do is I take it to there, and I can raise or lower it here. A lot of times I like to start with around a 5 or a 6 depth, and that's gonna be really light, not gonna really dig in too much. And I could also control that you're up and down here, and I can also control it here if you look up on the handles. So these handlebars will slide up if you want to. I prefer my hands down here and control it here, but contractors sometimes like doing this. But if you look, that's gonna change that depth. And this is gonna be in hundredths of an inch. So to do a really pretty deep cut, it's gonna be around, I always tell people around 15 is pretty darn deep, and it's gonna do a lot of removal. So you wanna kind of be careful that if you go above that, you're gonna get a lot more. A lot of times if I'm doing a decent amount, I'll set it at 8, and that's a good starting point. And if you look, I can set this depth. I hold the button down, and it's set now at that. So I can float it up. You see the machine will lift up on its own. And then when I want to take it back down to cutting depth, it's going to drop it down. And then as I'm walking along, I can kind of judge that. So if I want to change that at any point, if I'm not getting enough, I can raise or lower that. So if I want to get a deeper cut, I can take this down. There's 0.2. And I can change that again just by pushing that. Or I can just run it if I have a certain area. So the trick is, the whole trick to this machine is, I'm not going to set the, as I'm running, as I'm walking, I'm going to see the cut pattern, and that's kind of whatever I get it when I first set the machine up, that's where I keep that cut pattern or that cut depth. And then when I want to stop cutting, I can either push that button, or at the end of the line, what I can do is put my foot here and lift the machine up and move to your next section. Fairly easy. The hardest part is just really not difficult, but getting this set where it's barely touching the concrete, and then you can go from there. It's very easy to make your corrections.